Hello everyone, and welcome to this Diablo 3 dungeon guide for the Witch Doctor Raiment of the Jade Harvester set. We'll be going over how to set up your character, and I'll also explain how to complete both primary dungeon objectives. Keep watching until the end to see a full playthrough of the entire set dungeon with additional tips. To get started, let's first take a look at the set bonuses so we'll know how to gear out our character. This set relies mostly on the Soul Harvest skill to provide a toughness increase and to deal massive AoE damage all through the 6-piece set bonus. For dealing damage to large groups of monsters, we will apply a damage over time effect, either Haunt or Locust Swarm, to each monster, then cast Soul Harvest to instantly deal all of the damage from both skills at once, killing every enemy with one hit. Most of our damage will come from casting Soul Harvest in this fashion. The skill has a base cooldown of 12 seconds, so we'll be looking to obtain cooldown reduction to cast it more frequently. For dealing damage to single targets, we will apply Haunt 2 times to each one, usually back to back, which will instantly kill them with one hit via the 2-piece set bonus. Due to the nature of how damage is dealt through these set mechanics, having excessive amounts of extra damage output is not beneficial, so we'll focus on gearing for survivability instead. The set dungeon is also very large and there are many monsters to kill, so traversing the dungeon quickly is extremely important. Therefore, in summary, cooldown reduction, movement speed, and toughness are the main priorities for the gearing and skill setup. In this setup, we are using 5 of the 6 set pieces in the shoulders, torso, hands, legs, and feet slots. In the head slot, we have Leoric's Crown, which provides increased cooldown reduction with a diamond equipped in the helm. In the wrist slot, we take Lacumba's Ornament, which provides a significant increase to toughness. And in the waist slot, we have Vigilante Belt. This belt does not have a legendary power associated with it, but it does come with an inherent cooldown reduction stat. In the main hand slot, we have Sacred Harvester, which provides extra damage and toughness through extra stacks of the Soul Harvest skill. And in the offhand slot, we have Shakrani's Triumph, which provides a buff to the Spirit Walk skill. This item gives a huge boost to movement speed and is highly recommended to have equipped for the dungeon run. In the neck slot and one of the finger slots, we have the Traveler's Pledge and the Compass Rose. This 2-piece jewelry set will mostly provide increased toughness while we move through the dungeon. And in the other finger slot, we have Retchel's Ring of Larceny, which will provide a movement speed increase after fearing monsters with the Horrify skill. When it comes to rerolling stats on the gear, the top priority is cooldown reduction, then take anything that increases toughness. For Kanai's Cube in the weapon slot, we have Engium, which provides significant increased cooldown reduction after killing elite monsters. In the armor slot, we take Haunting Girdle, which applies an extra application of the Haunt skill each time it's cast. And in the jewelry slot, we have Ring of Royal Grandeur, which allows us to gain the 6-piece set bonus while only having 5 of the 6 set pieces equipped. For gems, we have a diamond in the head slot for cooldown reduction, topazes in the torso and leg slots, and an emerald in the weapon slot. For legendary gems, we have Esoteric Alteration for toughness, Bane of the Powerful mainly for its toughness benefit, and Molten Wildebeest Gizzard for increased life regeneration. For Paragon, the main priorities are movement speed, cooldown reduction, resource cost reduction, and gold pickup radius. Next, let's go over the skills. We'll be using Soul Harvest, which is mandatory for the dungeon. The rune choice doesn't matter since the 4-piece set bonus provides the effect of every rune. Next, we have Locust Swarm, which is also mandatory. We take the Pestilence rune, which allows a single cast of Locust Swarm to cover an entire area of enemies. Next, we have Haunt, which is another mandatory skill. We take the Resentful Spirits rune, which increases the application rate of the skill. Next, we have Spirit Walk with the Severance rune for increased movement speed. Then we take Piranhas with the Piranhado rune for an important grouping and crowd control mechanic. And then Horrify with the Stalker rune for another crowd control mechanic and some additional movement speed. For the passive skills, we have Grave Injustice, which has great synergy with the set dungeon and provides some significant cooldown reduction, particularly for Soul Harvest. Note that this skill benefits from your gold pickup radius. Then we have Rush of Essence for some mana regeneration. Next, we have Creeping Death, which allows the Locust Swarm and Haunt skill applications to last longer on each monster. And lastly, we take Spirit Vessel for a cheat death mechanic. If you have enough toughness and don't take a lot of damage, you can consider swapping this out for another passive skill that's more beneficial to you. Now let's go over the dungeon objectives. The first primary dungeon objective is to harvest 15 enemies simultaneously 10 times. You'll accomplish this objective by casting the Soul Harvest skill on groups of 15 or more monsters. This dungeon is riddled with enemies, and you will need to make virtually no effort to group them up, as they naturally come in large enough packs. All you need to do is look for larger groups of monsters, get their attention, cast the Piranha skill, and let them come to you. Then cast Soul Harvest while standing near the group. There are many opportunities to complete this objective. The dungeon has a very high density of monsters scattered throughout it. You'll just need to be patient and wait for enemies to group up tight before casting Soul Harvest. You are already motivated to group up monsters in this fashion due to how the set gear applies damage through the use of Soul Harvest, so completing this objective should come naturally. The second primary dungeon objective is to kill 100 enemies afflicted by both Locust Swarm and Haunt. To accomplish this objective, you'll first look for larger groups of enemies, then cast Locust Swarm on a single monster. Due to our rune choice for the skill, Locust Swarm will then continue jumping to nearby monsters until virtually every enemy has an application of it. While Locust Swarm is spreading, you'll cast Haunt on monsters in the group. Try to cast each Haunt on a different monster to avoid killing them due to the 2-piece set bonus mechanic. Once you've applied Haunt a few times, kill them off with the Soul Harvest. If you approach every large group with this skill sequence, then you'll naturally make progress toward both primary dungeon objectives at the same time. Next, let's take a look at the dungeon map. This dungeon is pretty large. I've broken the map up into 5 segments. Segment 1, 2, and 3 take you on a figure 8 loop through the first part of the dungeon before segments 4 and 5 finish it off. There is a lot of ground to cover, and if you aren't proficient with the skills, then you may not finish in time. Don't be surprised if you need a few attempts to get the hang of it. There's no particular locations that you need to focus on for grouping monsters for the dungeon objectives. High density groups can be found just about anywhere. Just make sure to kill every enemy you see as you go, as you won't have enough time to make a second pass looking for stragglers. So now that you have the setup and you know how to approach the dungeon, let's head to it. Go to Act 4, then to the Gardens of Hope first tier waypoint. From there, head south and go through the portal to the Vestibule of Light. Then head southeast. The dungeon entrance is in the right side corner of the large open area. And next, we'll look at the playthrough. For this run, I went with pretty bare bones gear to demonstrate techniques. I had to equip Lacumba's ornament bracers to have enough toughness to survive the dungeon. Any additional items or stats that you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier, will give you a much easier time completing the dungeon. Once inside the dungeon, cast Spirit Walk to get to the first group of monsters as soon as possible. There is a lot of ground to cover and we don't want to waste any time. Don't worry about getting a large group of monsters right away. Our first priority is to get stacks of Soul Harvest established so we can benefit from the massive toughness bonuses. Cast Soul Harvest on as many enemies in the first group as you reasonably and quickly can. Then cast your Piranha and Horrify skills as needed to crowd control the monsters as you wait on the cooldown of Soul Harvest to reset. While the crowd control skills are in effect, cast Locust Swarm once or twice to let it start spreading around. Then cast Haunt a few times on different monsters to manually spread it. When monsters come out of the crowd control effects, then cast Soul Harvest while standing close to a large group of them. When this is done correctly, you'll make progress toward both primary dungeon objectives at the same time. Afterward, if there's still a large group of monsters left, just repeat the sequence to continue killing. If you see a large group, you'll always want to try to collect at least 15 enemies so you can ensure you make progress toward the first primary dungeon objective. Don't feel bad if you only harvest 13 or 14 enemies. You'll have plenty of opportunities to get 10 groups of 15. The limiting factor for completing the dungeon will most likely be how fast you can kill everything in it. When you are heading to the next group of enemies, always cast Spirit Walk if possible to get a run speed boost. Here, we somewhat quietly complete the second primary dungeon objective, but nothing changes about the playstyle and cast sequence. At this intersection, we head southwest back toward the dungeon entrance, starting segment number 2 of the dungeon map. We'll come back to the intersection later to finish off any stragglers in that spot. Note that when you cast Soul Harvest on a large group of monsters, its cooldown will instantly be reset via the Grave Injustice passive skill. So you can cast it again right away on nearby monsters that were out of reach or on ones that didn't have Locust Swarm or Haunt applied to them yet. Here's the end of segment number 2. Make sure you clear out this area down these stairs. The elites in this dungeon can summon both walls that can trap you and ice bombs that will explode after a few moments and freeze you in place if you get caught by one. Because of this, you may want to make elites a priority target and double tap them with the Haunt skill to kill them off when you see them. Remember, you can use the Spirit Walk skill to get out of any tight spots if you get caught in a pack of monsters or are trapped by walls. If you stay on the move, bobbing and weaving through monsters, then you shouldn't get trapped or hit very often. There, we finished the first primary dungeon objective. Now we can just focus on clearing the remaining enemies. Don't be afraid to cast Soul Harvest as soon as it's available to help kill monsters faster. If you are constantly saving Soul Harvest for the perfect times, then you may not be killing enemies quickly enough to be able to finish the dungeon in time. The cooldown for it is relatively short, so you should never be waiting long for it. Keep in mind that when you're waiting on the Soul Harvest cooldown, you can try to prioritize individual monsters by casting Haunt twice on them to kill them off. Don't worry about trying to group them up. This dungeon is all about kill speed, so you always want to be actively taking monsters down. Now, back at the main intersection, we head northeast to start segment number 4 of the dungeon map. The area here is relatively wide, so make sure you check and clear both sides of your minimap so you don't leave behind any monsters. If you are finding that Soul Harvest doesn't kill all the enemies in a group, then give Locust Swarm a couple more seconds to spread to all the enemies. Leverage your Piranha and Horrify skills to keep the monsters crowd controlled so you don't take any hits while you're waiting. Another benefit of casting Soul Harvest frequently is to maintain the toughness benefit from the 6-piece set bonus. Casting it once every 12 seconds should happen pretty naturally. Note that the less overall toughness you have, the more important it is to maintain this. Now we're in segment number 5 of the dungeon map. The green beam you see jumping around between enemies is the Locust Swarm skill spreading. This is a good visual indicator of how widespread the skill is. If you notice it has spread to most enemies on the screen, then you don't need to reapply it, and can just focus on casting Haunt, saving some time. This is particularly important since Locust Swarm costs a significant amount of mana, so you'll want to minimize the number of times you cast it. Here's the last couple of groups. And we're done. Good luck trying to finish this one. If you enjoyed the guide and would like to see more content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.